The good news is it's nearly time for aperitivi. Just a few more words before. So we want to spend the best part of an hour now talking about some reflections from members of our committee about some of the ideas, the concepts, the concerns, the issues, the feelings that people have been sharing with them throughout the conference. And then I want to say a few words of retrospective reflection and also looking ahead to what comes out of Assisi 2012 as well. So the order we will do it in is to take each member of our panel from the committee here first and foremost, and they will share their reflections, coming from different standpoints themselves, but also from having flown around the different rooms and sessions throughout the week, taking soundings, keeping their ears to the ground, and they're going to help us to keep the conversation going. And then we will reconvene for our final session with Roger Haight, and then it will be time for some fine Mountain Umbrian music again, and the aperitivi before dinner. So the first person who is going to come up to share with us her reflections is Sandra Mazzolini. Please give Sandra a big round of applause.
It seems to me that a key word of our meeting is multiplicity. Its forms have been many in these days: multiplicity of meetings, issues, persons, etc. Spaces and times have been interconnected in this various form of multiplicity. The space have been, for instance, those of our cultural and confessional belonging. The times have been those of our complex and controversial history. All that has suggested to me that either nobody can understand and know alone where we dwell in common, or to impose his her point of view. I think that to understand and know where we dwell in common is only the result of a shared research. This presupposes, first of all, a previous reconciliation with our past, which should be reread in a more complex and objective manner. Then, this implies the discernment of the signs of the times, led by the Holy Spirit, who acts in creation as well as in human history. The Holy Spirit gives us the gift of dwelling common as task, challenge, and possibility.
Thank you, Sandra. And next, we'll hear from Vladimir Latinovic.
Hi. I was entrusted with two tasks from Gerard for this closing session, and I must admit that I have failed miserably to fulfill both of them. The first task was to try to collect the main themes which people were discussing in the moments between the sessions. Well, since I was using my session pause time to print out your papers, which you in the good academic tradition have finished at the last possible moment, I was unable to talk with many of you, so excuse me for that. The second task was to collect the topics we possibly missed in order to add them for one of our future conferences. I'm afraid I can't say that I was much more successful with that, because we have heard so many voices on so many different topics in the past 3 days that I'm unsure if there's anything else to add. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it was a perfect conference. There is no such thing. I'm sure many of you would do things differently, or maybe you even think you could do it better. And my only message to you is do it. You will not only prove that you can, but you will also contribute to the ecumenical cause which we also hope that we did with our little gathering here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And now, Mary McClintock-Fulkerson.
Okay. Let's see. Communion certainly seems to be a term that has lots of understandings that keep emerging. And definitions of communion certainly range from the different denominations, but I'm intrigued by this, how central it is to many of the folks here. Secondly, and this has been more implicit, just the way in which culture and so-called tradition or culture intersects with faith, and the way in which some would argue their inevitable hybridity. There's no such thing as simply the tradition that isn't hybrid with culture. So I'm saying that's a kind of implicit issue that has come up in various forms. Next, the importance of difference. Now, when is difference the sign of brokenness, and when is difference something to honor? That's come up many times. When is it crucial to respect and honor difference, or when do we think of it as something broken that needs some kind of mending? Obviously, the notion of mending or healing is all over the map in our discussions. Now, subject position, I'm going to use that phrase. I think several issues have come up under that topic, whether named that way or not. Who is the we who dwell in common? That's come up in a variety of sessions. There can be sometimes a kind of assumption of a false universal in that we, and that's particularly operative when, and here's a second point under subject position, the assumption is that some issues and discussions and topics are contextual and some aren't. Now, I know that's complicated, but we've even had sessions marked as on contextual subjects or agencies. And in fact, that implies that there's some other topics and agents and authors who aren't socially located. So there's some issues around a kind of power issues that need further exploration, I think, to put it minimally. In relationship to that, I've had some conversations, especially recently, around processes, other models that move beyond the dialogical model. And say the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians in the U.S. Communities, engagements that actually draw in people who are of different faith traditions, who come together, join voices in community, write books together, and that model has not yet been surfaced in an important and central way. So that's just a few.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks very much. And next is Mark Chapman.
I think I'll start with a confession. A public confession is that I'm really very exhausted. I can sort of remind myself I'm no longer a student able to survive on 4 hours sleep a night. Anyway, I think at the beginning of the conference I expressed the hope that we'd be able to initiate some conversations, make some friendships, help networks develop. And I hope that's happened. There's something to do from after this conference. And I'm also very pleased from the kind of practical perspective that people got to the right places on time. The logistics of doing up at Assisi were really quite extraordinary. So I feel a bit like one of the cabin crew on an aeroplane. Your comfort and security is our first concern. And there's 2 exits. Anyway, there we are. But just to reflect on some of the aims of the conference, we wanted to bring people to a holy place with a large and inexpensive conference centre. On a modest budget, we tried to bring as many people from across the world who replied to our invitations and were able to come, and to have as representative a selection as we could manage on a budget. And nobody was here in an official capacity. It was relatively informal, and we've heard lots of voices from different places, and I think in lots of ways our hopes have been fulfilled. I mean, I leave it to you to judge whether you think the same, but certainly, I feel affirmed that what we hoped for has happened. But I guess also from going in and out of quite a lot of sessions, taking photographs and listening, I think there was an openness and an honesty as well to name some of the differences and to name some of the conflicts that are there in between the churches, between people in north and south, east and west, between men and women, you name it, the differences have been named. And I think that's absolutely vital for a session like this, is to build up that trust so we can name the difference. And that's how we can begin conversations and dialogue. So I think that's been one of the important things. There's been some uncomfortable stuff here, and that's really important, because that's how dialogues develop. Genuine listening, genuine dialogue requires that trust and openness to listen. Where is the power, where is the authority in our different countries, different churches? How does a gathering like this reflect some of that power and authority and the economic injustices? Inevitably it will do. Inevitably there's compromises in anything the church tries to do, in anything we do informally or formally. Always we're reflecting in some ways those economic political structures and the hierarchies. We can't do without that. We're compromised inevitably, but I think there's something Assisi has to teach us. And one of the great ironies about the time we've had the privilege to worship in some of the most extraordinary churches in Christendom, and it's a great privilege to do that, but you think you're building those enormous churches of St. Francis, Santa Chiara, on the tombs of people who gave up everything. They took off their clothes, they gave up their power, they gave up their possessions, and what do? They build these beautiful churches on top of them. And I think that brings about something of the tensions and something of the irony at the heart of the Christian faith. You can't do without that compromise with power. And it's that constant need to re-engage prophetically that is part of what this dialogue is about. But I think underneath it all, meeting in Assisi is important, because something of Francis's evangelical vision, going back to Jesus Christ, at the heart of it all for him, is to look at the basics of the faith. And that is something that is often very uncomfortable and very insecure. And that's something that we constantly have to do over and over again in our church and in our world. And one of the things we've done in this conference is to engage quite a lot with the world. Ecumenism can quite often be rather inward-looking, but we've engaged a lot with the world out there. So I'll go away from the conference probably with a lot more questions than I had at the start, which is a good conference, that it's got me thinking. And probably after a good night's sleep, I'll begin to reflect on it and to try and think through how we're going to build bridges into the future. I think things are much more complex than I thought they would be. The tensions are there, but they're at the heart of the Christian faith as well. But it's also what's at the heart of the Christian faith is that vision of a better future. And I hope something of that vision has been renewed here in Assisi as we've gathered together over these few days. And that is what I'm going to take with me as we move away from this place. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Last, and certainly not least, San Pietro, Peter Fan.
Am I the last one? Okay. Last meaning the eschaton. And so you can say they have said everything, so what can I say anymore? First of all, I have collected all the gossip that I heard at the bar the last 3 nights, and they have been published in 2 volumes. Actually, it's the book by Joseph Moutourage, 2 volumes. He gave me free, so I would like to promise him that I like to advertise for you. What have I seen here that I would like to see when we plan this conference. The first thing is youth. So many people told me that this is the place where you see so many young people. People like myself, 18 years old. But you see, that's the future. When you go to ecumenical gathering, you have these doddering 80 years old. Now you see, this is where the future of the church lies, the young people. Great. The second thing people told me is that this is the one kind of academic conference where piety and scholarship are joined. Try to do this at American Academy of Religion and you'll be chased out of the room. But here we gather as people of faith. And we go to pray. Some of us are Muslims, some of us Jews, some of us Christians, and some of us also Catholics, And in spite of our religious diversity, we pray, each in our own language. And I'm sure God understood Arabic, God understood Vietnamese, I'm sure, when I pray the Our Father. So this is a sense of that I see that combine what John Wesley called piety and scholarship. Great things happen. The third thing I walk around, I participate many, is that the variety of perspectives, the richness of perspective that you bring into the conversation, not only on the church, but on the world you mentioned, or other aspects, ecology, so forth. The variety of perspective, the challenging perspective, the courage in which we raise questions that often we whisper rather than speak in public. And lastly, let me end with this. I recall the transfiguration scene. Jesus went up the mountains, and then there's a voice. This is my son, my beloved son, listen to him. And Peter said, Lord, let's make 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, one for Leah. And knowing Gerard Mannion, I would ask for a wine cellar in addition to those 3 tents. Now, you know that I am by temperament very pessimistic, frustrated by nature. But the final thing that I want to take away from this is the scene of transfiguration. We have been transformed by the reality of our division and our wish for unity. I am very serious when I told you the other day that I am haunted by the words of Vatican II, that Christian division openly contradicts the will of Christ, is scandal to the world, and damage our evangelization. This is the words that should haunt us day by day and would never allow us to go out of here and get our business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, despite your racial stereotyping against the Irish. Despite how true it may be amongst many Irish. I am very much looking forward to tomorrow morning and the inboxes slightly being less overflowing. But I've certainly very much enjoyed sharing your company and dwelling in common with you all week. There was an Englishman, an Irishman, a Vietnamese, a Mexican, a Serbian, an American, and 3 Italians. They walked into a few bars over the last 2 years, and they managed to pull off a rather ambitious project of trying to get a very diverse mixture of people together who would mostly get on for most of the week and perhaps take away something that will be transformative of their perspectives. We began with our theme of where we dwell in common, and we've sought to try and clear and map pathways for dialogue for our times in the light of this. What have we learned? How far have we come? And where can we dare to dream we can go from here? At this stage of the programme, I'm going to take the risk and go slightly over 15 minutes. Taking virtue theory as a guiding methodological principle from the outset, with virtue understood as a mean between deficiency and excess, I'm not talking about wine here, our gathering has been guided by a perception of dialogue as a virtue between a refusal to engage in any ecumenical or interfaith encounter at all, on the one hand, and an excess of pleasantries in formal and official conversations which end in avoiding all difficult and divisive issues altogether. Instead, dialogue is the challenging yet hard path that we must traverse in order to work towards greater and genuine harmony, or if you prefer, communion, and this itself in diversity. The method that has guided our conference has in part been inspired by recent contributions in ecumenical and comparative ecclesiology and interfaith dialogue. Most particularly in relation to this motto, where we dwell in common, we have been especially inspired by the work of our gathering's final plenary speaker, Father Roger Haight, who offers an extended reflection on this theme in his 2008 work, Ecclesial Existence, itself the practically oriented third volume of a lengthy historical and comparative ecclesiological treatise, which has been extremely well received. There he seeks to suggest that the more opportunity Christians have to reflect upon and to come to appreciate just how much they share in common and the importance of what they already have in union, then, despite the remaining significance of overcoming what doctrinal, cultural, social and practical differences which remain, Christians will come to appreciate that such are of vastly lesser enduring importance than what they share, than where they dwell in common. We have tried to take this a stage further, step by step initially, and applied it within particular churches as well, across differing faiths, and between members of faith communities and the wider societies in which they live, as well as in relation to the global human family. Our aim then this week has been to try and help to reignite the ecumenical and interfaith flame in a positive fashion that would allow the cause to gather momentum for these times. So we have been seeking to develop dialogue in various different ways, but above all else, in a sense of shaping a method for track 1.5 ecumenism, as a bridge between official and grassroots initiatives, and as a way of bringing together the various strands of interaction in between. We want all of you to go back and be animators on behalf of dialogue in your own communities and local contexts, to be animators on behalf of sharing and accentuating those areas where we dwell in common as being of infinitely greater importance than those areas that remain divisive. In doing so, those divisive issues and challenges recede in their impact, and new ways of overcoming and resolving them will emerge. Back in the 1990s, David Tracy, the Chicago Roman Catholic theologian, spoke of a new situation for ecumenism and interfaith relations emerging, noting that two stark choices presented themselves at the extreme poles. First, to go the way of retrenchment, foundationalism. Second, to take flight, the path towards relativism. Or to seek to proceed via a third route. And I quote Tracy, what Paul Ricoeur nicely named a second naivety toward one's tradition. Enter critical philosophy and revisionary theology, allied to a genuine openness to otherness and difference. The only serious question becomes, is a second naivety possible? If so, how? Many of us may rediscover our traditions in and through discovering others, their difference and their truth. But is it possible to honour the truth of one's own religious tradition while being genuinely open to other great ways as other? Clearly the answer must be yes, or we are all lost in a Hobbesian state of the war of all against all. Such talk of naivety puts one in mind of Francis of Assisi once again, our patron saint this week. Not that he was anybody's fool, but there was a touching, almost childlike innocence about so many episodes from his life. From his refusal to rewrite his order's rule when the Pope kept sending it back and rejecting it because it was so simple, scriptural, and attentive to a life free of possessions, to his willingness to reach out to all, especially the poor, to those of other faiths, to animals, to all creation. This was a long-distant precursor of both Ricoeur's second naivety and of what we have been describing this week as macro-ecumenism. The story of the Wolf of Gubbio. What's more naive than trying to bribe a wolf with food to leave people alone and succeeding? A still more striking example of what might have been presumed not simply naivety, but even foolishness or outright stupidity in the eyes of some at the time, and even since, was the idea of St. Francis travelling from Umbria, in the heart of Italy, all the way to Egypt to visit the Sultan, Al-Kamil, who ruled there at the time. Francis did this in the 13th century, when frequent flyer miles were not available. This was at a time when one of the Crusader armies was encamped nearby, and so an era of great tension and conflict between people of differing cultures and faiths. Now, we all know there is little historical detail about what transpired between Francis and the Sultan, except to say that Francis was received graciously, and that perhaps the visit impressed upon him the importance of mutual respect, peace, and yes, dialogue between people of differing faiths. But he took a great risk. He fought and acted outside the box. He wanted to go and accentuate commonality instead of difference. To this day, it has inspired Franciscans working for peace, as well as many others, for example, both Muslim and Christian alike. His visit recently was taken as the inspiration for a book which explored Catholics and Muslims working together for the common good. The authors of that book offer a very profound and telling statement at its outset. The God of both Christians and Muslims, the one God, has given both communities two commandments that override all their differences: to love God and to serve their neighbour, especially the neighbour who is poor or marginalised. Groups of faithful Christians and Muslims living out these commandments by working in solidarity with each other could set an example to others in their communities that they would follow, and also others in all communities, both religious and secular. Where we dwell in common. Accentuating this pushes even beyond Ricoeur's second naivety. In fact, it brings us to the stage of a third naivety, a whole new mode of existential engagement and being, wherein both our place and tradition are enhanced at one and the same time, to those we engage and those we engage with are transformed too. This demands thinking outside the box, the courage to take the necessary risks. Note that a comparative, ecumenical, and interfaith method in general does not seek to dissolve differences, nor to avoid the hard questions that remain within and between churches, within and between faiths, and between faith communities and the wider world, but rather to put those things into their proper perspective when viewed alongside the commonality shared by people. We've sought to apply a comparative method this week in all we have done, but above all else in that dialectical comparison between what remains divisive and where we dwell in common, that leads us towards the synthesis of risking a harmonious future through thinking outside the box. Here the general method outlined through Roger Haight's Ecclesial Existence is thus commendable and also expanded beyond its inter-ecclesial and Christian application. Note also that there are echoes here of similar methods, of course, pursued by many involved in some of the great pioneering ecumenical movements and moments in the late 19th and early to mid-20th centuries, just as it shares much in common with the approaches adopted by many involved in Vatican II. Indeed, one could say that it was Pope John XXIII's explicit intention when he called the Second Vatican Council. As the commentary to the Abbot edition of the Concilia text makes clear, here speaking about Nostra Aetate, the declaration on the relationship of the churches to non-Christian religions, the stress on what men have in common, apologies for the non-inclusive language, it's from the 1960s, was one of Pope John's operative principles. As he often made clear, this approach does not deny or neglect differences. It simply gives primary consideration, as Nostra Aetate says, to common goals or interests, unquote. Needless to say, many theologians and faith community leaders, particularly among Christians, especially perhaps in the Roman Catholic Church in subsequent decades, have rejected such an approach and favoured accentuating difference first and foremost to the detriment of dialogue and commonality. When we set out on organising Assisi2012, about 100 years ago it feels like now, what did we hope to learn and what did we hope all of you might learn? Well, we hoped we would all learn that thinking outside the box collectively can be seen as a good thing and not as a threat. That new methods, including the overall threefold structure adopted this week, might help move things forward. We hoped that we would also learn that difficult questions must be on the table, but so also must be the areas of commonality and the two compared to see their relative merit. We hoped we would all learn from people who have worked in conflict resolution and from the perspectives of others from widely differing churches and faiths that have experience of difficult situations and the demand for new methods. And one thing we especially hoped for is that emerging scholars would learn that they are the generation that must deliver on dialogue and greater global harmony. And so it is time to become part of taking responsibility for the future of the wider ecumenical agenda today. So where do we begin to move this process of processes forward that we've begun this week? In the coming weeks, once we've come up for air, we'll be in touch about our plans to bring together not just the fruits from this week, but the ongoing fruits of the seeds sown here in Assisi in 2012, long into the future. First of all, we wish to share our conversations and expand them and invite reflection upon them with a much wider audience. To such an end, we will be seeking to publish as many of the most pertinent, inspiring, and challenging papers from our gathering as possible. We will therefore be in touch about a publication series that is planned and which will be ongoing, not simply as the fruits of this week, but the fruits of many additional conversations and studies for many years to come. There will be instructions online, in fact they already are online, for submitting your papers for consideration for this. And Norman Hjelm has been helping us and advising us with developing this publication series. I don't know if Norman wants to say a couple of words. No, that's okay. A second medium for publishing the fruits, not just of this week, but further weeks, is the journal Ecclesiology, which is published in association with our network. And Paul Avis, the editor, is here somewhere. Paul Avis is here. Paul is very happy to receive submissions for this journal on related areas, many of the topics we've been discussing, and to consider them for publication into the future. Second, the conversations must continue in other ways too. One of the ways in which we hope this can be done is through the formation of regional groups who will take forward this process and initiate further processes to re-energise the ecumenical cause still further in their own local contexts by thinking outside the ecumenical box. We will be in touch about trying to encourage the formation of such also. We hope these will be further bridge-building track 1.5 ecumenical initiatives between the Dome and the grassroots ecumenical ventures. And of course, this can build on the work of existing regional groups as well. Third, we wish to keep and encourage the involvement of emerging scholars as fully as possible. So perhaps we will begin a conversation about trying also to get emerging scholars involved in those regional groups, and maybe also that a committee of emerging scholars might be formed as well to forward their own perspectives and agenda as well as development. Fourth, future gatherings. What we have enjoyed this week has been very special. But on such a scale and reach, it takes an awful lot of organisation, fundraising, time and energy. We do hold open the possibility of a follow-up event on this scale some years down the line. But as I don't want Justine to quit, we're not planning this in the near future. In the meantime, in addition to all the continuing of the conversations outlined already through publications, regional groups, emerging scholars, the Ecclesiological Investigations Network will organise several events each and every year, as it has been doing since its foundation. A number of these are based around its program unit group that holds at least 3 sessions each year at the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion, and 4 sessions will be held this year, I believe. One of these is always in conjunction with another program unit group, practicing what we preach in a dialogical sense. Then there are smaller, local and larger conference and seminars organised, again often in collaboration with other groups and organisations where such is fruitful and possible. Finally, they will continue the tradition established in 2007 of holding one international conference as the main signature annual event of the network, usually on a less grand scale than what we have had here in Assisi. To date, we have met in St Daniel's in Wales, Kerala and Tricur in India, Durham in England, Leuven in Belgium, Utrecht in the Netherlands, Dayton in Ohio in the US, and now our long-standing dream to meet in Assisi, Italy, has been fulfilled. Next year, we follow up on another long-standing aim, to reach out to Eastern Europe. The 2013 annual meeting of the Ecclesiological Investigations Research Network will take place towards the end of May and will be marking many things. Among them, we very much hope, will be a celebration of over a year of follow-up to Assisi2012 and the fruits that it's borne. It will also be a year when Constantine's Edict of Milan will be remembered on its 1700th anniversary. This was itself, of course, an historical moment that embraces and epitomises so many of the issues and challenges and tensions concerning where the peoples and faiths of the world dwell in common and what things divide them. We will therefore be meeting in Serbia. Watch this space for more details. At the risk of becoming like an Oscars ceremony, we cannot end without sharing deep words of gratitude and appreciation. First of all, we wish to thank our hosts, and especially Archbishop Sorrentino, Friar Pasqualino Massoni, Director of Domus Parcis here, Giuseppe Stironi, and Sabrina Corelli, and all here at Domus Parcis as well as to the custodians and staff of the basilicas and other great churches here, for giving us such a warm and generous welcome, their hospitality and assistance. I wish also to extend a very, very deep and personal note of the deepest gratitude to each and every member of the organising committee for their tireless, literally, efforts in making Assisi 2012 happen. So thank you very, very much. You know their names by now, but I'm going to mention them once more. Justine Gonzalez, Gioacchino Campesi, Mark Chapman, Paul Collins, Mary McClintock-Fulkerson, Miriam Ha, Sandra Mazzolini, Vladimir Latinovich, Giovanni Pernigotto, Peter Fan, and a very special word of thanks for his enormous help to local friar Brian Terry of the Society of the Atonement, and also to Aaron Hollader, Nancy Green and Dennis Horgan, Anne Maxfield, Eva Goldenova, Natalia Vizimirska, and Richard Park. I'm sure I have forgotten people. If I do, I will see you in the bar later and express my thanks in person. Please give all of those people one round of applause. Thank you to each and every one of our sponsoring institutions and organisations, and to those who helped with the mammoth task of raising the funds to make this special gathering move from a dream to a reality. Thank you to all of our wonderful volunteer helpers throughout, and to each and every speaker and participant and panellist. Finally, a lot of people have been saying how much they enjoyed this week and how much they have taken great things away from it, and they keep thanking us. And I keep saying to them, not to be falsely polite or anything, that if it's been a good week and a moving week and something significant and transformative, it's because you've made it that week. We had an idea, we did some logistics, we debated many different forms of session and organisation, but without each and every one of you, none of it would have meant anything. So thank you all, each and every participant, for all you have brought to this and will take away from this very special city. Your own contribution to this special gathering has been deeply appreciated. Each and every one of you will help us collectively to appreciate that in focusing our energies on where we dwell in common lies the surest and most fruitful starting point for clearing and mapping the pathways for dialogue in the 21st century. Because you have been so good and wonderful, the aperitivi hour, a half hour, has been extended to a full hour. So let us go and dwell in common. Thank you very much.
Gerard,
14 minutes.
Gerard. Somebody needs to say something about this man who hasn't slept in about 3 years. He works all the time, and I hope he gets a rest after this.
Just 5-minute break, then we'll reassemble for Roger.
Field of ecclesiology, Roger's trilogy on the church has stimulated a lot of academic discussions, among others in the AAR session, which the EI group organized a couple of years ago on his work, and which has been published with Continuum under the title Comparative Ecclesiology. One of my doctoral students is currently writing a dissertation in dialogue with your ecclesiological thought, and I'm sure that this is the case and will be the case for many others. His next book will appear in the fall and is entitled Christian Spirituality for Seekers. During our conference, Roger shared with me one mild criticism on this wonderful event, that the input was a bit too Catholic. So let's listen now to his hopefully not too Catholic concluding lecture.
Thank you for staying around. The title that I've given this talk is Where We Dwell in Common, Ecclesial Spirituality as a Basis for Living with Other Religions. And the idea is to take where we dwell in common and ecclesial spirituality out of the inter-Christian sphere and to extend it to the whole world of religions. So by church, I mean the whole Christian movement. The question that I will address, and it bothers me a bit, and I'd be very interested in your feedback on whether what I say works or not. The question I will address is how we might understand the church in a religiously pluralistic world. Religious pluralism will not be overcome, and it is a positive situation, concomitant with our historicity. Nevertheless, this situation conflicts with several traditional understandings of the church and requires theological explanation and interpretation. So I will address this question in terms of the mission of the church, because this generates a relational understanding of the church to the world, to society, to injustice, and to religious division. Understanding the mission of the church in relation to issues offers a dynamic response, looking forward in contrast to the institutional status quo. I also formulate my response in terms of spirituality. That is the existential life of the members of the Christian community. Because the role of the institutional church is precisely to nurture and to build up Christian spirituality. The church, with its doctrines and its theology, spring from and function in relationship to Christian spirituality in order to enhance it. Spirituality, then, is an open category, referring to life lived in the light of transcendence, and as far as Christians are concerned, in the light of transcendence as that is revealed by Jesus. It's important to recognize that the church's position relative to other religions is deeply problematic, especially in its missionary activity. And this appears clearly in the mission context. How can the church not be divisive among religions when it offers an alternative to other faith traditions? Is not the Christian church, by its very nature, its autonomous existence, a danger to other integral faith traditions? That's the question I want to answer, respond to, reflect on. In responding to it, I want to go a bit further and ask whether or not the Christian church can go beyond getting along with other religions, but also whether it can play a positive role as a force of reconciliation among the religions. Christians interpret Jesus Christ as reconciler. The ultimate test of that proposition is whether Jesus can be seen by others actually to be an agent of reconciliation among the world's religions. So I will not be able to develop this vision that I'll propose with the nuance that it deserves. I'm sure I'm going to raise a lot of questions here, but since I appeal only to well-known principles, I hope I will be able to outline this vision of the church's mission in 5 theses, which together respond to the question, how should we understand the church in relation to a religiously pluralistic world? So the first thesis. All religions contain some truth and some error. And insofar as a religion is true, it is universally relevant, and it should be shared. I'll not develop that. I think that's clear. The point is that other churches should be missionary too, to share their wealth with us, with everybody. The second thesis. Human beings are one family, so that foundational religious worldviews should uphold a common humanity and not be divisive. That has a lot of implications. I mean, if a religion is divisive, then it's doing something wrong. Therefore, it presupposes that our shared humanity is a datum, a given, and a sacred thing, and religions that view themselves as chosen or as superior have to really be careful about how they implement that, seems to me. Third thesis. Christianity has grounds for an embracive interreligious spirituality in the conception of a personal and loving creator God. Now, here I'm speaking from a Christian point of view, of course. No closer unity, no closer union between humans and God can be conceived than God creating us out of nothing but God's love. This conception makes God the within of all things and wraps the whole of existence of all people with God's love. But is there a way of interpreting Jesus Christ in such a way that the church's representation of him does not appear divisive? That's the question. Now, this theology of creation, I think, has a lot of richness in it, and it should be developed, and I would develop that much more in a paper to show that it really makes God present in all religions and operative there. Thesis 4, a distinction between Jesus of Nazareth and later Christian interpretations of him can support a non-divisive Christian mission spirituality. Three commonly recognized distinctions facilitate this move. The first considers the distinction, but not separation, between Jesus of Nazareth and the later theological interpretations of him. Jesus of Nazareth is a public figure represented in the Gospels. Everyone can approach him. He is prophetic, but not divisive. The second distinction, but not separation, subsists between a spirituality of following Jesus and formulas of belief about Jesus. Far from being divisive, a spirituality of following Jesus has analogous parallels in other religions, and other religions can find themselves frequently enough in the teachings of Jesus. A third distinction, influenced by the doctrine of creation, sees a difference between Christocentrism and theocentrism in the structure of Christian faith. Christocentrism makes Jesus of Nazareth the object of Christian faith, whereas theocentrism makes God, the creator God of love, the object of Christian faith and considers Jesus of Nazareth a revealer of God and a mediator of that faith. These distinctions, of course, need more discussion than can be given at this point. They may turn out to be quite controversial. But when the church represents Jesus in terms of the Gospels, people of other religions may be attracted to him and find what Jesus is referring to in their own traditions, in their own spiritual lives. Or one may notice analogies between Jesus and the central symbol of their own faith. Doesn't it do the same kind of thing that Jesus does for Christians? For example, many find analogies between Jesus and Gautama and the spiritualities that these two figures represent. Finding this commonality in historical beginnings and originating spirituality as distinct from beliefs which were generated after the fact and which each party continues to hold. This distinction provides a place where people of different religions can meet on the same terms, and can discuss their differences. These distinctions then provide a point of entry into a common place for conversation about the differences of belief. One presupposes that dialogue answers everything. But what are the presuppositions for even entering into dialogue? This is what I'm addressing. Thesis 5. Missionary dialogue with other religions or other religious communities can represent Jesus as a proponent of religious reconciliation. It's not enough, I think, to say that Jesus and the church are not essentially divisive. The situation today demands an effort to understand how the church, preaching Jesus Christ, can be an agent of reconciliation among the religions themselves. Is this possible? Let me try to answer this complex question with a simple response by bringing forward some of the principles that I've just mentioned. Christian mission presupposes God's presence, God's love, that these are entailed in God's creative power that sustains human history from within. God is present in all religions. The leading edge of mission, therefore, should not be doctrines about Jesus Christ. It should appeal to Jesus' preaching of God's values and what a spirituality of following Jesus entails. The gospel portrayal of the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth shows that he represents transcendent reality that is completely given to the flourishing of human existence. Jesus thus supports all and everything that is humanly positive in the other religions. He does not compete with, but endorses everything that augments positive human development. Christians should present Jesus in such a way that he underlies and does not challenge those practices which attack human existence. Does not undermine anything in the other religions that promotes human life. Jesus only challenges practices that attack human existence or neglect the human when it is in crisis. His prophetic ministry negates only the negation of human life itself. Discernment of the difference may not be as simple as that. I'm casting this in relatively simple terms. I mean, even in Christianity, it's hard to sort these things out, what is for life and what is against it. But this formula, at least, defines a mindset and a direction of Christian interchange with other religions that provides a way of entering into a reconciling conversation without supremacist language and without interpretation that flies ever higher and away from Jesus' basic message. In sum, then, the situation of religious pluralism calls the Christian church, as well as the other religions, to a mission of reconciliation among themselves, among ourselves. A Christian spirituality that bears witness to the theocentric ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, prior to entering into dialogue about doctrines and beliefs, opens up the possibility of the Christian church mediating religious reconciliation. So let me conclude with a brief summary statement. Several decades ago, Wilfred Cantwell Smith proposed an order of progression for interreligious dialogue. It should move from a consciousness of us and them to a consciousness of I and thou that engenders personal and sympathetic mutual understanding. But the goal of such interchange is really to reach a higher we consciousness in which people work together across religious differences in a common effort to understand ourselves religiously. A return to Jesus and to the primary spiritual language of the Gospels allows this to happen and allows the Christian mission to be heard by other religions in an unthreatening way. and it allows the church to become, I think, I hope, a reconciling force in our present historical situation of religious pluralism. Thank you.
We will have the discussion at the bar on Jared's paper, and I think it's now the time for the spiritual conclusion.
I should be talking, my mouth should be open.
I was just looking whether you were here. Yeah. Do we start? We start right away, I think. Sure. So, I would like to ask you to calm down a bit and and welcome you all to our closing soul food gathering. Let me introduce to you Sister Alessandra Schiaboletta. She's a Franciscan Sister of the Atonement and the Ecumenical Officer of the Diocese of Assisi. She's so kind as to open our closing soul food gathering.
Pace e bene da Assisi, pax et bonum. Reflection and prayer. A journey once taken alone, we now choose to take together, moving forward as one body into a future filled with possibilities. We walk without maps, but we walk confidently. And we walk with hope because we have chosen to be companions for each other while on the way. We travel forward along a way we have not gone before. We travel as one who is led, arms outstretched, as one who is called forth to life. We travel in need, dependent on God for strength, for assurance, dependent on each other, God's instrument for love. leaving known paths behind us, we choose to journey forward in faith and service. As the journey brought us here in Assisi, so now we began to eat anew, in company with each other. Creator God, having been gifted by many insights during this Assisi 2012 gathering, we now ask for your continued guidance, that we may be open to your Spirit, working in the midst of our communities throughout the world. Thus, through prayer and ministry, we will proclaim the gospel, seeking to fulfill the prayer of Jesus, that all may be one, ut unum sint. Amen.
So as our final gesture on our traveling together through this week, we are going to bless each other on our way. And I'm going to explain how we're going to do it. We are going to form a big circle around this room, a one-line circle. So if I could ask everybody to stand up and try to form a circle. Don't forget your leaflets, you will need them.
Up here or in front of in front of
And people on the back, if people could stand on the back to join, to close the circle, that we form the full circle around here. Yeah, that seems to work well. We can try to go in the back, and then if you can move.
Best it's probably going to be an ellipsis.
Okay. Now, if everyone, you're right now. If everyone could identify the person on your right, you need to know which is the person on your right.
It's a clue, it's the opposite to the left.
Right. Okay. So what we are going to do, we are going to give a blessing for a few moments, in a few moments of silence. We are going to give a blessing to the person, each of us to the person of our right. So kind of forming a chain, forming a community. And if you feel comfortable, you may put a hand on the shoulder of the person you are blessing. You don't have to do it. And just to explain, we want you to do it in a form you feel the most comfortable with. So we do it in silence, and in this few moments of silence, you can pray for that person, you can just simply bless this person or just give good wishes to the person, whatever you feel you want to offer this person. After a few moments of silence, we will close the blessing with a song, which you have on your leaflets. That's why you need them.
time to hit the bar.
Because I've been living in Norway for 25 years, I have a German background, but it's kind of,
You still have your German, though, yeah?
I speak German.
And in Norway, do they speak German?
No,